Hey folks, this is Andrew from Gemba Red, and today we'll be discussing how many watts do you need for full body red light therapy. Now, of course, you can get the latest generation oversized, overpowered red light therapy panel system and be pretty well assured that you have more than enough power. And if anything, if you get one of those systems, you would do well to turn down the power, especially since in another recent interview, Professor Glenn Jeffries is outspoken again about these panels being way too powerful.
So there's an explosion in red light masks. There's an explosion in gyms with, red light devices, most of which are far too powerful. You do not want to put vast amounts of energy into your body. You really don't.
And even Dr. Uncle Jack Kruse cautions against using too much energy because of the biphasic dose response, which is a very complicated concept that only he can fully understand.
And then red light therapy also has this very unusual law associated with it. It's called the biphasic response. Small doses of red light are better than huge doses. And it turns out if you get too big a dose of fake artificial red light, it can lead to problems.
And apparently everyone except me knows that he's never pushed high intensity products or high doses. And so how do we thread that needle and find that Goldilocks dose that we don't want too much power and intensity, but we also don't want too little? And as we know, the original marketing claim was that you needed at least 100 milliwatts per centimeter squared for red light therapy to be effective. But we know that turned out to be a fabrication by the red light therapy influencers that were just trying to match their pseudoscience sales narratives to the false measurements of solar power meters. But now that criteria has obviously been debunked, and a lot of the red light therapy influencers are slowly backpedaling and covering up their tracks. But that leaves a void or a vacuum in the industry that there is no scientific criteria for what's a minimum threshold to look for intensity of red light therapy. So one way we can be reassured that we have enough power in our red light therapy devices is to listen to the dosing recommendations by one of the leading researchers. Dr. Hamblin has explained in recent interviews that you need about 50 to 100,000 total joules in about 15 to 20 minutes.
So total energy is a big deal. And with these whole body light beds, you can absorb 100,000 joules of energy relatively active, 20 minutes sometimes, something like that. 50 to 100,000 joules of energy.
Now, this is yet another game changer for red light therapy dosing, is that we're focusing on the wrong metric. Is that everyone's trying to dose based on joules per centimeter squared, when Dr. Hamblin says that the total joules is the most important dosing parameter. And actually, this is not a game changer at all, because Dr. Hamblin's been saying this for years.
Well, obviously, because it governs how much light you get in. The most important parameter is how many total joules you put on the head.
And so that means we can quickly back calculate what the wattage of a panel would have to be to deliver that much energy in that much time. And so we can calculate about 42 to 111 watts of optical power need to be provided by an LED device to meet that dosage requirement. Now remember, this is the optical power. This is the radiant power from the device, as opposed to the electrical power is how much electricity in watts they consume. And then you have rated watts, which is the maximum power rating of the LEDs times the number of LEDs, which the rated watts are the ones that kind of don't really correlate to much of anything at all, because you could have 3-watt LEDs, 5-watt LEDs, double chip, triple chip, COV, and they don't really correlate to anything that's physically kind of relevant. So it's easier to stick to electrical watts because you can measure that with a simple power meter, or you can measure the total optical watts by putting the device into an integrating sphere that collects all the light into one sensor so they can know the total power coming out of the device. So now that we have the total wattage we need for effective red light therapy, we can use those numbers to shop and make sure the panels you're buying deliver an adequate amount of power. And I have a bunch of third-party test results because I was helping an influencer update their book. So we see here a bunch of brands and their model numbers, and they're all delivering total optical outputs that are perfectly sufficient for delivering effective red light therapy. And so that means just one of these panels can deliver you full body red light therapy. You don't need big modular systems. You don't need oversized panels where most of the energy is going to be missing you anyway. And so that's going to mess up your total joules dosing anyway. So it's better just to get a device that's actually a little bit slightly smaller than yourself to make sure you're just collecting all that energy and you can calculate it properly. And so there we go. We got the total watts we needed from the dosing recommendation from one of the leading researchers. And then we took that scientific independent criteria and we checked it against the third-party measurements of many brands, and we found that they were adequate. So this is the scientific process. We take the science and then we make sure the products are sufficient. As opposed to you see the red light therapy influencers, they take the products and they try to shoehorn the science to match it. And there's another layer of interesting analysis that I did with this third-party data is that I calculated the optical efficiency of all these panels. And so the conversion of electrical power into optical power, it's not obviously 100% efficient because nothing is. And, you know, the LEDs have inefficiencies, the circuit boards, the power adapters, you know, and then there's fans and there's other accessories like LCD screens that draw power. So there's a conversion of electrical power into optical power output. And we see there's a pretty consistent range of about 35% up to about 41% of the efficiency of converting the electricity into optical power output. And so that can form a good rule of thumb is that if you just get the power consumption, the electrical power consumption that is easily measured with a kilowatt meter from the hardware store is like less than $30. So you don't need any fancy tools. You don't need a lot of expense. And so you can measure your power consumption, convert it with, you know, like a factor of 37%, and you can estimate the total optical output of your LED panel. And so that could be a much more accurate way to estimate your total optical output rather than a lot of ways like you could try to measure it with different devices out in space and then try to estimate the, you know, uniformity of the light. That doesn't really work. So it's just better just to go by these holistic numbers of efficiency, and that way you get, and it's easier too, and you get the right numbers in the right range. So anyway, that's my bit for today. Thanks for tuning in.